Alrighty, so we are going to move on to part 2 of our theoretical notes packet. I want you guys to see that there are links embedded in here for the textbook. So hopefully if you click this, it at least takes you to page 177. If not, it should give you access to the table of contents and you can navigate your way through there. I also have found and given you links to various animations that could really help you in visualizing what is going on with these genetic diseases. So this is a really great one that helps you to review the central dogma and how that leads to various genetic diseases. And it shows you genetic diseases that can occur at different phases of, going from DNA to protein. This one here, the genetic screening simulation, is pretty neat. It goes very quickly. It's just a couple minutes long that you can go through and look at different regions and how genetic diseases are prevalent in different areas of the world. And then this is a really great website that has lots of information regarding single gene disorders. And you can go in where genetic disorders are, and you can come back in here and see even more information, like examples of genetic disorders. Also throughout the notes down here, like in genetic disorders, I've given links to various pages to help you in visualizing some of these things. However, as far as the notes packet goes, everything that you will need to finish the notes packet will be in this video. So what you will see here is that we are looking at the statements of 3.4U6, many genetic diseases in humans are due to recessive alleles of autosomal genes, and 3.4U7, some genetic diseases are sex-linked and some are due to dominant or codominant alleles. So to identify what a genetic disease is, this is just any disease that can be caused, or any illness that can be caused by a gene. So, we've looked here at the structure of chromosomes. Again, there it is condensed. Well, here it is uncondensed, that big web of DNA. And then within that one small little area is a gene, right? That's one segment of the chromosome and DNA. And that gene codes for a specific protein. Well, oftentimes we can create a faulty protein. And the creation of that faulty protein is what leads to genetic diseases. So you can track these genetic diseases that are heritable through pedigrees, and we'll go through more depth of pedigrees later, but we are going to be able to identify it with carrier, affected, and unaffected. So dominant alleles are going to be a very rare occurrence of genetic diseases. These are very small in proportion, and it's just not possible to be a carrier for this type of genetic disorder. If someone has even just one copy of this, they will have the disease because a dominant allele is going to overpower, in better or worse terms, the recessive allele. It's extremely uncommon to have these diseases because, unfortunately, most dominant disorders that are, illness-causing, they typically, well, not most, but they will typically result in an organism not being able to live long enough to reproduce and pass on that gene. An exception to that is one we're going to talk about with Huntington's disease, and you'll see that this individual here is heterozygous for Huntington's. However, they still pass it on to their offspring. Now, it doesn't mean 100% of their offspring because this individual still has a small h. So, with the rules of probability, you can still get two homozygous recessive offspring. However, the really sad thing about Huntington's that I'll discuss in a bit when we get into that detail is that you really probably don't know you have Huntington's until you're around 30. And so it's too late, and oftentimes those individuals will have offspring before they know whether or not they have the gene. With genetic testing, we're able to identify that a little bit easier now. Recessive alleles are going to cause most genetic diseases, and that's because there has to be two copies of that recessive allele in order to present with the disease. So if a female, as shown here, presents with a recessive disease, then she can pass that allele on to the offspring, but they might not necessarily, if their father also does not have it, then their offspring might not have it, right? Let's say she's homozygous, or let's say that she, when she passes on her allele and this father passes on his allele, he has a dominant one and she's homozygous recessive. So 100% of their offspring will be heterozygous, right? So they're all going to have the allele for it. They're carriers though. They might not know that they have it. And so then this person could have an offspring with this person, not knowing that this person is also a carrier that has a silent recessive allele that can be passed on, okay? Codominant alleles is when the heterozygote of an individual will have a different phenotype than either homozygotes. So this is an example with sickle cell anemia. And I'll go into more detail on this, the chart on your notes I will be filling in with you in a little bit. But sickle cell anemia, the homozygote is susceptible to malaria but has no sickle cell. So if you have two healthy versions of the sickle cell gene, which is a single gene that can be affected, then you're not going to have sickle cell, but you are susceptible to malaria. The heterozygote, big A, little a, can be resistant to malaria, but they really don't show too many symptoms of sickle cell disease because they've got enough normal red blood cells functioning that can kind of compensate for these sickled blood cells. But if someone is homozygous recessive, yeah, they're resistant to malaria, but they also have the fatal version of sickle cell disease. So codominance can be beneficial in certain genetic diseases. We also have sex-linked genes. So we've briefly discussed this in class, but sex-linked genes is when the inheritance pattern is different for males and females. Again, this is because males only have one X chromosome. So in the example of color blindness or red-green color blindness, the gene for this is on the X chromosome. And so if the male inherits a faulty version of the gene on the X chromosome, then they only have one to show, right? So if the father, let's say the father of offspring are unaffected, but the mother is a carrier, then they could have offspring, right? Where this male is unaffected because he gets the X chromosome from his mom that is functioning, right? But then this daughter, she's unaffected because she gets two healthy versions. You could have a daughter that is a carrier because if she gets the X chromosome from her mom that is affected, then she could be a carrier for it. However, the affected male, the affected son, got the faulty version of the X chromosome from his mom. So he got the faulty version from his mom, and the father gave him the Y chromosome, causing him to be colorblind. The very first example of this was identified in the fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster. And what we see here is a very similar thing. So males, if they present with the, so the red eyes are wild type. Okay, so if they present with this wild type gene on their X chromosome, then they will get, I'm sorry, the white eyes are wild type, then they will get white eyes as opposed to their red ones. But notice the female, they can be carriers of it, but since they have two X chromosomes and one of those gets inactivated early on in development, they have the possibility to compensate for that, gene that isn't functioning properly. So now on to the chart for sickle cell anemia. It is a recessive disorder. It is not sex-linked, and it affects, the effects are when you're homozygous recessive. So if you were to have two of the alleles for sickle cell, you would have severe blood clotting disorders. If you were heterozygous, you would be resistant to malaria, but maybe not have as severe of blood clotting. And then homozygous dominant is unaffected. So again, with sickle cell anemia, you get one gene that has a single base substitution. And because of that, sickle cells form and they block blood flow. So it's a severe blood clotting disorder. They can, at a very, very slight injury, someone with sickle cell could potentially have severe blood clots that cause them to die. Cystic fibrosis is when there is a faulty CFTR channel. So notice here we have a channel that's going across the cell membrane. We have to be able to move chloride ions in and out of our cells, especially in lung cells. This helps to deal with the concentration of mucus on either side, and it has to do with the movement, the diffusion of molecules. And without the correct diffusion of the chloride ions, and keeping that isotonic state of chloride ions, the mucus can build up outside of that cell, and it is extremely hard for these individuals to breathe. Oftentimes, they will have to wear these vests that shake their bodies violently for hours on end on a day because that is thought to help to break up the mucus. And yeah, it's just, it's a very terrible disease. It is a recessive disease that, this slide kind of got a little messed up in here, but it's a recessive disease that results in just one amino acid difference. So you get 3 base pairs. So the 508 triplet is absent in the mutant form. And so this mutant CFTR cannot regulate chloride transport. And since those chloride ions remain in the cell, water is going to continually move into the cell instead of moving back and forth in normal osmosis, which then again, that's what causes that thick mucus to be formed. They also, I do want to mention, they also have other issues because the CFTR gene is throughout our body, but there are often issues with the pancreas as well in creating hormones and things of that nature. But the biggest one that's prevalent is the lung disorder. So symptoms, infertility, disruption of pancreas, intestinal, biliary, bronchial, and sweat glands. So it's a very all-encompassing kind of disorder as a result of one triplet being deleted. And then hemophilia is recessive. It is not sex-linked, but it is a blood clotting disorder.